Hey everyone, welcome to another interview. I am here today with John McNeill, who is joining me from across the seas. John, welcome aboard.
Thank you.
We're very glad to have John here today. Part of our series, we're talking about the Whitley College and North American Institute for Indigenous Theological Studies kind of combo series of master's intensives to study theology from an Indigenous perspective that will be happening in July in Melbourne. John is teaching one of the symposiums down there, an Indigenous Practical Theology Symposium on July 10 to 13. So just, I guess, right off the bat, what's exciting you most about coming to Australia, John?
Well, first of all, I've never crossed the equator. I've traveled many times around the Northern Hemisphere. But it's going to be fun just to cross the equator and see what it's like to see the Earth from the bottom, looking up.
Well, we're all upside down here, so that'll take a little while to adjust, yeah.
Right. Well, we've known all along that you were all upside down, but I want to see it with my own eyes.
I love it. Exactly. There you go. And apparently, according to The Simpsons, our toilets flush in the opposite direction. So
I'll be very careful about that then.
Great. Well, before we get to the symposium and talking about the stuff at Whitley, the courses at Whitley, how did it, in terms of maybe your professional life, your journey, how did you come to be traveling across the equator to teach at such a thing?
Well, I spent most of my professional career teaching either behind the Iron Curtain when the Iron Curtain still existed, or in Russia. And teaching in very pioneer situations. And then after many years of being kind of out on the very forefront of pioneer educational projects, I thought maybe it's time for me to work at a university and help train other people to do this. I was starting to feel the aches and pains in my bones and thought maybe some younger people could get out there and I could help equip them, which I did for 15 years in Manitoba in Canada at a Christian university. And then about 4 years ago, it became obvious it was time for me to retire there. I was getting close to 70, and I personally don't really believe in retirement, but there's some things you have to kind of comply with. And so my wife and I chose to move back to Quebec, where we have roots, and I began looking for things to do where I could be constructively involved, and I met the leader of this North American Institute for Indigenous Theological Studies at a planning seminar where he was trying to get something started in Quebec, and ended up offering my services. I had worked with Indigenous students in Manitoba and really enjoyed it. And that was one of the big regrets in retiring from the university there, because I saw an enormous untapped potential in our we call them First Nations in Canada, now First Nation students. And two things really hit my buttons when I'm teaching. One is when I get a really bright student who catches, who really sees a very big picture and forges ahead. And the other is finding a student that has enormous potential but hasn't yet unlocked it, and helping them to unlock it. And that's what I was experiencing with First Nation students. And by volunteering to work with NAITS, I'm able to do that. And my initial offer of volunteer help has advanced to the point where I'm now the academic dean for our programs across North America and also in Australia, although we expect very quickly to be able to pass that on to local people.
That's great.
To help get a project started.
Yeah, well, it's really exciting to see that this course is coming to Australia. I got to chat with Pastor Ray Minikin, Aboriginal Christian leader here, who's helping to organise it down there. And he talked about, the dire lack of professionally paid or professionally trained Indigenous theologians here in Australia, and hoping that being able to learn in this capacity at a master's level will help to start to address that. So
we're ambitious to go beyond that. In North America, we have a couple of universities that cooperate with us on a doctoral program as well. We're ambitious to see that happen in Australia and south of the equator, let's just say, in your neck of the woods.
Yeah, that would be exceptional. So it's really exciting to see these movements in this direction. So for those who are maybe interested in going down to Whitley and taking these short courses, these master's intensives, could you give us a little overview of your one, Indigenous Practical Theology? Could you give us a little overview of the course and maybe some hopes that you think students might take from it?
Okay, well, what I'll be doing is I'll be taking material that is presented by speakers at both our North American Symposium, which is going to be in 3 weeks in Portland, Oregon, and material that will be presented at the mission conference that's associated with this event in Australia. And I will use that material as a basis for discussing with students about practical applications of this material in their own environments. And so we will meet during that period of time that you mentioned, but then we will continue to be in contact with one another for a period of a couple of months, interacting with one another, interacting with the presentations. I will have video material from Portland, and I expect to videotape also all the presentations in Australia and then have them available so that we can one by one go through them. And I, along with the students, we interact with them, listen to one another, and then formulate for ourselves what would be practical applications of those ideas in our particular environments. One of the secrets of this program that we have is that all of our students are fully involved in their local communities while they study. They do not have to leave for 8 months or 12 months of the year in order to study. They leave for very short intensive courses, but basically they are fully involved in their local communities. So the idea of application, practical application of what is being learned is much easier to come to.
What do you see as some of the real benefits in that learning model that people are embedded in their community, still involved in their community? So there's that constant application. What are some of the benefits you find of that model?
It seems to me that most of us, even people who are very academic, and I'm one of those, learn best when we can actually do something practical with what we're learning. So we can move back and forth between trying it out and seeing if it works and then thinking some more about it and analyzing. And the typical academic environment puts too much emphasis on the theoretical and the abstract aspects of learning and not enough typically on the practical application. And so I see learning as a kind of a dance where you move back and forth between those two. And I think that our learning model helps to make that easier for students. Yeah. Plus the fact that all of our teachers really emphasize that.
Yeah, great. So people might understand this idea of, theology as this concept, but there's kind of two qualifiers in front of, Indigenous Practical Theology. For those who don't really know or haven't really come across this before, maybe you could help with a bit of conceptual lightning round of helping us understand, first maybe what practical theology is, and then maybe what, if there is a different Indigenous Practical Theology.
Okay, well, there are many Christian theologies, and I'm not just talking about ones influenced by philosophy. I'm talking mostly about ones influenced by local culture. I've worked, for instance, for many years in Russia and in the Slavic countries, and their view of Christianity is in some ways profoundly different. And it's possible, and often it's been the case, that Christians have just simply said, well, we don't listen to any other versions. And the fact of the matter is, as Paul said in one of his letters, he said, when we study these theological matters, it's like looking in a very poor mirror. In other words, we're seeing something, and we have to realize for Paul, a poor mirror is much, much worse than anything we can imagine, because he didn't have silvered mirrors like we did. For him, a mirror might have been a polished soldier's shield or a mud puddle. And he said, really, we're seeing as though we're seeing in a bad mirror. So we're getting enough to understand, so we can move ahead in knowing God, but we really don't understand nearly as much as we like to think we do. And so we need to listen to one another. And the Indigenous people in Canada, the First Nation people in Canada, have taught me in various ways to look differently at the biblical revelation and to understand it from a different perspective. Not that it denies what I previously knew, but it adds to and enhances and fills out what I previously knew. Just like Paul said, if you're looking at a bad mirror, ask somebody else to help you figure it out. Because the image I use often with my Russian students was because in Russia they have a lot of public transport and the bus windows are never washed. And so the bus windows get filthy. And I said, Paul's image, maybe instead of a bad mirror, should be a dirty bus window, and you're trying to find your bus stop, and you look and you look and you look, and if you really, really try, you can get off at the right stop, but it's not easy. And I think that we should have a similar humility in our theology, and that involves also enabling other cultures to look at the revelation God has given and tell us how they see it.
Yeah,
they see it differently.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And it does seem that in the last, 30, 40 years, there has been a move to to learning and trying to listen to the Christianity in the global South more and more. And prominent theologians have emerged out of that, and there's greater awareness. It may seem, though, I could be wrong here, but it does seem that in that still Indigenous voices and Indigenous theology is still like underrepresented and maybe utilized, for want of a better term.
Underappreciated.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on why that might be the case?
Well, follow the money might be one thing to say. Where are the rich countries? The rich countries influence the world as far as political philosophy, economics. They influence the world also from the point of view of the church. The church that can give the most money to projects X, Y, and Z is probably going to end up having most influence. And we have to get past that. Yeah. I remember as a young mission worker or foreign worker, I realized that at one point I had a lot more money to put into the mission project than anyone else there, because I had a full-time job outside the project. And I had to stop myself from saying, okay, well, I want this money to be used this way. Because I had the money, but somebody else had much better insight as to how to use it. And we're not at that point yet in any of our countries where our government will give to Indigenous people's money and give it without strings and say, okay, you people know how to do it, you do it. And part of the reason for that is they'll look at an Indigenous person and say, oh, you're a leader, but you don't have a master's degree or you don't have a PhD. Well, one of the things we're doing with our program is saying you can get a master's degree, you can get a PhD that is exactly the same quality as what the world around you has been telling you. We won't respect you because you don't have it. Well, we're making it available, but in a cultural package that makes it easier for them to do it. It's not academically easier. The academic standards are not one iota lower than the world around us, but the package that they come in is different. For instance, we don't set the kind of deadlines, you have from September to December to finish a course. We set different deadlines because we know our students are in different circumstances, so we don't impose those kinds of deadlines.
That's really exciting. It's really great to hear that, that understanding and the bringing in a different appreciation of culture into the way we structure pedagogy and learning. So I think that's really, really important to be doing. So I imagine at this symposium and that these courses that you do and what we're having at Whitley, there's going to be a temporary community of Indigenous and non-Indigenous people who are coming together to learn and explore faith together, and particularly to learn from Indigenous voices and to center Indigenous voices. Now, imagining people think, hey, that's not such a bad idea. Maybe we should look for like a less temporary example of this, a less temporary community that is intercultural, that is centering voices previously marginalized or currently marginalized. What are some lessons you'd impart for those who are seeking to build and foster and sustain those kinds of communities?
Well, one of the things that is not always terribly important in Eurocentric academic circles is relationships. I mean, yes, because we're all human, relationships are part of who we are as humans, but really the weight of relationships is greater in some cultures than others. And my experience with First Nations people is that relationships are really a lot more important than they are to me as an Anglo-Saxon European. Now, I think that's one of the things that I would encourage people is to build relationships and nurture relationships. One of the reasons this project is coming to fruition is that my wife and I made a very, very firm and deep connection to Ray Minicon last summer when he was in Canada. And out of that came, on his part and on my part, the desire to attempt to get this project going again. There's been work on this project for 10 years, and it keeps on falling flat. And but the spark of our relationship and a shared vision helped to get this thing going again. I guess I would just encourage people, meet people, get to know people, be real, and build relationships with people, and share vision, and then go for it. Trust that if you've got a good thing going, and if God is helping you, you can really do something great.
Yeah, it's a great lesson. Appreciate that a lot. I was wondering, building from that, like thinking of your role now currently in a professional capacity. As you said, you're white Anglo-Saxon, working in this Indigenous theological program. What has been kind of your experience then? And like, it's very easy to, I think, often as people who are always given opportunity and always have been given chances to take leadership, how have you worked at being an ally, or at even, working with an institution to give your best and to see the best for the institution without kind of, I guess, making yourself the center?
Well, I've learned over a fairly long career in international missions that Europeans are no longer, if you think of the Old Testament, when the glory of God left Egypt and the Israelites followed the cloud. Well, I don't think the cloud of God's glory is over Europe and North America anymore. And I think, we have a lot of resources, including educational resources. But if we're going to really do anything good, we need to just be prepared to serve with those resources. And so when I approached Terry LeBlanc, the director of NAITS, several years ago, I said, look, Terry, I'm available. What can I do? Just how can I help? And that's still my attitude today. I have a title now. We kind of laugh about it because neither one of us knows for sure what my job description is. But I just do whatever I can do that helps to make things work. And I think that needs to be our attitude if we're going to overcome the decades and centuries of abuse of First Nations and Indigenous peoples. We need to realize we're called to be servants. And that doesn't mean a servant in the sense of the Pope, being carried around on a sedan chair decorated with precious stones. It means, do what you can to help and ask them, in quotation marks, to tell you what to do.
Yeah, that seems like a good, because you've mentioned also like, working in mission and things like that seems like a good kind of thing to take over into that kind of world as well. That mission is about going and serving and allowing oneself to be converted and led rather than, carrying the banner forward oneself. Yeah.
And part of the problem in the mission setting is that typically the European or North American mission organizations and missionaries are the ones with the most money. So very easily it falls to them to also be telling everyone else what to do, which is wrong. It's a wrong model, and we have to break that icon and smash it.
Yeah, I love it. That's what we need to be doing entirely. This semester with my ministry at Macquarie University, in our groups, we've been looking at the topic of reconciliation, which is obviously a contentious hot-button topic around First Nations and Indigenous peoples around the world. in Australia, we've been looking at the way the process here was kind of criticised from Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples for kind of the way I guess, following the money, that the agenda was set by the government, the process was kind of controlled by the government. There was, the focus was on national unity rather than anything about past harms and redress and things like that. And but then there's still, we are called to be, ambassadors of reconciliation, and there are good, positive examples of reconciliation, both at a national level or an ecological level or a interfamily level. I was wondering what your thoughts on reconciliation as a concept, whether it retains validity, whether it retains capacity to be a kind of a goal to search after, and maybe your experience on how to avoid some of the trap falls that that reconciliation processes have fallen into in the past.
Yeah. Well, I think reconciliation is an obligation on Christian people, that we are to be reconciled to one another as we have been reconciled with God. And I don't think it's an option. But part of the problem is that often a person in a position of power tries to dictate what reconciliation looks like, and or thinks that by simply saying "I'm sorry," they can oblige the other person to participate in a process of reconciliation. My being sorry about something, for instance, if I offend my wife, that does not oblige my wife to immediately, be all lovey-dovey with me and want to forgive me. She has a process that she also has to go through. An example of this recently occurred in Canada when our last Prime Minister, who's now resigned, but he publicly apologized to the First Nations people for what the Europeans had done to them. And he did that consciously as a Christian. He was a Christian believer, this Prime Minister. And it was a good moment, but there was no follow-up. Shortly after, his government cut the budget for helping First Nations communities and cut budgets for First Nations education projects and so on. So the First Nations reaction after a while is, well, yes, that was nice that he said that, but where is the evidence that he means it? And unfortunately, in a lot of our processes of reconciliation, it all goes on in our heads. It's not something that gets worked out in terms of a reconciling behavior or a repentant behavior. And I think we're just fooling ourselves. We've developed a vision of Christianity, I think, that is much too intellectual, not practical enough. James says in his letter, show me the works that prove you have faith, and then I'll believe you have faith. And Luther, he was so upset by that he wanted to throw James out. He didn't want James in his New Testament. and that's one of the weaknesses, I'm afraid, of Reformation theology, which, yes, they were fighting to correct abuses of the past, and I get all that. But, I think they went a little too far in making Christianity almost purely intellectual.
I think that's a really good challenge. What you said about the apology in Canada rings very true, I think, to the apology here that happened to the Indigenous people by the Prime Minister. And then, I think people point to exactly what happened afterwards. There's still massive gaps in incarceration levels, in education levels, in life expectancy, and there's still, lack of financial input into it. It kind of I always think back to the story of Zacchaeus, who, in order to make amends, pledge okay, I'm going to give money back, and I'm going to make amends by giving more than I, took. And that his apology was met with financial restitution. And Jesus says, and now salvation has come to this house. So I think that's a good biblical point.
That's a very, very good example also.
Well, John, I thank you very much for spending some time with us today. Obviously, for those of us here in Australia, there's the Whitley programs, 3 intensive master's courses that people can take to study theology from an Indigenous perspective. But maybe there are people watching this from Canada and the US. How can they connect with NAITS and the work that you guys are doing?
Well, NAITS has a website with lots of information, NAIITS.com. There's very ample information there. They can connect with the director there. They can connect with me there. So that's a good entry point.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Well, John McNeill, thank you very much for being with us today. I hope you enjoy your trip south of the equator and can speedily adjust to the upside downness, the topsy-turviness of our fair shores.
I'm going to wear my magnetic shoes so that I don't fall off. Right?
Good call. Yeah, that's safe.
Good.
That's
Good.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much for being here, and we look forward to discussing this in groups.
Great. So long. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks.